Daniel Whitmore was not an adventurous man. He preferred quiet towns, familiar faces, and roads where you could walk for hours without getting lost. But in April of 1978, his uncle had sent him on an errand to a city he'd never been to, a sprawling, gray mass of concrete and steel, nearly 600 miles from home. The job was simple: deliver a box of antique silverware to a collector, collect the payment, and return by the weekend. The trip would take 3 days at most. Daniel told himself it would be easy. The train ride into the city was uneventful, though the weather worsened as the miles passed. By the time the train pulled into Central Station, the sky was already an oppressive uniform gray, pressing down on the rooftops. The station itself was vast, but lifeless. The ticket counters stood empty, and every sound, footsteps, rolling luggage, coughing, seemed to echo too loudly. A thin layer of soot clung to the windows. When Daniel stepped outside, the first thing he noticed was the smell. Not unpleasant exactly, but strange. A mix of wet pavement, oil, and something faintly metallic, like coins held too long in your palm. He booked a room at the Hargrave Hotel, a tall, narrow building tucked between two much larger structures. The facade was faded, its stonework worn smooth by decades of rain. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of mildew and lemon polish. The clerk, a pale, angular man, with eyes that didn't quite meet Daniel's, slid him an old-fashioned brass key and muttered, "5th floor and the hall." The room was small, the wallpaper faded to the color of old bones. The single window faced a brick wall so close that Daniel could have leaned out and touched it. The first day passed without incident. He located the buyer's shop, confirmed the meeting for the following afternoon, and wandered the streets in the meantime. But something about the city unsettled him. The streets twisted in unexpected ways, leading him in circles. Street signs were faded or missing altogether, and the ones he found often didn't match his map. The people here walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. Some stood in doorways, silently smoking, watching him with expressions he couldn't read. On his second night, the meeting with the buyer ran late. By the time Daniel stepped out of the shop, the sky had darkened into a deep, bruised blue. A fine mist hung in the air, coating the cobblestones. The lamps along the street glowed faintly orange, but their light barely reached the ground. Daniel glanced at his watch. Nearly midnight. He turned toward the nearest bus stop. His hotel was far enough that walking back didn't seem wise. Not in a city he didn't trust, and not this late. The bus stop was empty. A torn timetable clung to the metal post, illegible under the smeared glass of the display case. The road ahead was empty, swallowed by fog. Then he heard it, the distant growl of an engine. From the mist, an old bus emerged, its headlights dim and yellow. The paint was chipped, the windows clouded. Above the windshield, the route number glowed faintly, 23X. Daniel frowned. He'd studied the city's transit routes earlier that day. There was no 23X. Still, it stopped for him. The brakes squealed, the doors folding open with a long hiss. Inside, the bus was dimly lit. The air was thick and warm, carrying a faintly sweet, overripe smell. The driver, a man in a dark cap pulled low over his face, gave a small nod but didn't speak. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, the fingers long, the knuckles sharply pronounced. Daniel dropped coins into the box and walked down the aisle. The passengers were strange. They sat perfectly still, facing forward, their hands resting neatly in their laps. Their clothes were from different eras. A woman in a 1920s cloche hat. A soldier in a faded World War I coat. A boy in a sailor suit. None moved as Daniel passed, and none looked at him. He took a seat near the middle, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. The bus pulled away, moving through streets he didn't recognize. Buildings loomed higher here, their upper floors disappearing into the fog. Street lamps flickered, their light bending strangely, as if avoiding the bus. Minutes passed. They didn't stop. No one got off. No one got on. Daniel leaned forward. "Does this go toward Hargrave Street?" he asked the driver. The man didn't answer. His head tilted just slightly, and Daniel caught a glimpse of his reflection in the cracked rearview mirror. His eyes were just dark hollows. Daniel sat back, pulse quickening. When he looked again, the boy in the sailor suit was turned toward him. His face was pale and waxy, and his eyes were nothing but black pits. Slowly, his mouth stretched into a grin far too wide, splitting the skin at the corners. Daniel's seat creaked as he shifted back. The woman in the cloche hat turned next, her neck bending unnaturally far, the bones audibly popping. Her eyes were blank white, not the cloudy white of blindness, but the perfect emptiness of paper. One by one, the other passengers turned toward him in jerky, puppet-like movements. Some had no eyes. Some had too many teeth. One man's face appeared to melt, the skin sliding from his jaw in slow, wet drips. Daniel stood, stopped the bus. The driver finally spoke, his voice low and wet, as though bubbling up from deep water. Almost there. Daniel lunged toward the front. The doors didn't open. The windows wouldn't budge. The glass under his hands felt warm and pulsed faintly like skin.